but they're moving in the same direction. They're trying to do the same thing. So all the environmental insanity that you see particularly in Germany, but in other parts of Europe as well, the United States, at least under the current administration, are planning to do similar things. I mean, this is, again, if you make energy more expensive, you make life for the average person more miserable. It is really that simple. Now, they call it now in all these fancy terms, degrowth, or as you say, then they cloak it in this idea, this is how we atone for the past, this is how we atone for white supremacy. But to be quite honest, people of color will suffer from this the most. Let me just give you one quick tidbit. Most people in sub-Saharan Africa have access to the same amount of energy as somebody in France or Germany had in 1860. Do you really believe that they simply are going to accept this for the rest of their life? That they're going to say, in order to save the planet, we have to stay poor for eternity? They are simply not going to go along with this. And they shouldn't, to be honest. Like, they should have access to higher lifestyles, as should people have in Europe and the United States. So this is, as I said, it's only, if you take a closer look, it's only the very wealthy and unfortunately very often taxpayer funded who talk about this. But you never hear poor people getting into the streets and saying, tax us more, take away more from us, make our bills higher. It's always those who can afford it that say it has to get more expensive. We have to be very, very careful here.
זעקת, השכמה.
ילד מכין בסלון שיעורים בהיסטוריה, הוא לא שומע צלצול פעמון, בא בשעה שהטונה פולשת לטרויה, אבא נכנס עם קופסת עוגיות ואיתו אמא לאבא, סודות על האוזן לוחשת, ילד שומע קטעים בשיחה, לאלכסנדר מוקדון יש את חצי היבשת, אבא אומר שחצי המשכורת הלכה.
Has officially entered recession. What does this mean for Europe? What does it mean for the rest of the world? Are the policies, the Russian sanctions and awful climate policies to blame for all of this? Let's ask one of the smartest people I know. It's academic researcher Ralph Schulhammer, who has been following the decline of Germany over the past year. We've been featuring Ralph here on our show. Ralph, you've been predicting this. You predicted this was happen. I hate to say that you were right because of what it means for the rest of Europe. Good to see you, Ralph.
Good to see you, Clay. Thank you so much for the high praise. But I believe that everybody who was willing to see what was unfolding in Germany or in Europe generally was expecting this. It's a little bit of an ironic game, I would say, that is currently played, and we see this in the case of other countries as well. So we have the first measurement of economic data, and then the revisions come in. So first there's slight growth, then there is no growth, and then there was negative growth, or in this case now in Germany, it's a recession. If we look at manufacturing data in detail, particularly in the energy intensive industries, this is an energy induced recession, something we talked about a year ago, I think, that this is how it's going to play out. And everybody who believes in reality, I have to say, must have seen it coming. Like, you cannot be an industrial producing nation if you don't have energy. Everything needs to be made at some point, and everything that needs to be made or gets made needs energy. It is that simple. And we're struggling against reality, and now it sets in.
And so you have a lot of manufacturing, of course, a lot of big companies that rely on energy, rely on natural gas, rely on nuclear power to run their businesses, are closing down, shutting down as a result of this.
ובתוך הדפים של הזמן שעבר אנשים נגמרים ברגע אחד, אימפריות נופלות,
politicians knew this was happening, they knew it would happen, it almost sounds like it was calculated. To a cynical eye, it sounds like it was calculated. No?
No, I think it's two things that combine. So there is one group of people, of which I think we're going to talk in a second, who definitely want this to happen, right? They see it as a kind of virtue, atonement for the sins of the past. So after the West has been the exploiter, now it's time for us, in a sense, to throw our economy like the metaphorical virgin into a volcano to abandon the sins that we have committed. And then, which I think is the bigger group, I think the political class doesn't know. They have no clue how industry works. They have no clue how commodity markets work. I mean, we saw this with the sanctions against Russia. If you look at the sanctions, how they were imposed on the Russian energy sector, this is how, I don't know, a second-year intern at McKinsey would do it, right? This was done in a way that completely has no understanding how commodity markets work, which is why Russia, that was supposedly going to break down under this sanction, is still doing fairly well under these conditions, because they know how the commodity markets work, whereas Western politicians don't. And the same is true for industry in general, right? They don't know how stuff is made. They don't know where things come from. And this is a very, very worrisome trend. So we have radicals on one side. We have, as I say, incompetent rubes on the other side. But together they are a formidable force that is very hard to overcome.
Of course, you've been ringing this alarm bell. Hey, here's what's going to happen. You follow these ridiculous climate policies. You shut down your nuclear power. This is going to happen. So what does this mean for Germany? Now, we are technically in a recession. Europe's largest economy is in a recession. What does it mean for Germany? And what does it mean for Europe?
Well, to give you one example, which I find is, it would be sad if it wouldn't be partially so hilarious. So one of the major export products now from China to Europe is electric cars. And one of the major exports from Europe to China is traditional internal combustion engine cars. Now, what is the European Union banning? Internal combustion engines. So you create a situation where you destroy your export product and at the same time increase the imports from a global competitor. So just in a nutshell, to show the insanity of the policies. By the way, the same is true in renewables. As I'm sure some of your listeners and viewers know, the supply chain when it comes to wind, solar, and batteries is 87% under the control of China. So, I mean, good for the Chinese, but that's really bad for us. So we thought that dependence on Russian gas is a problem. Well, you wait for the dependence on Chinese photovoltaic and Chinese wind turbines. It's just going to be equally worse. So this is a sense of, I cannot call it any differently, it's a sense of economic suicide. And it's driven by, one has to speak openly about this. There is an agenda behind this, as I said before, some who want it, some who are kind of caught up in it, and of course also a media that is entirely silent, with the exception of things like Redacted, right? That is entirely silent on what has happening over the last couple of years, and then always act to be surprised. I mean, we saw it also today with the revised German numbers, like surprising downturn, surprised numbers. No, none of this was surprising. I mean, this was supposed to happen.
זעקת, השכמה.
כל הדברים הסתדרו, כך אבא מרגיע. אמא עכשיו משיבה בחיוך. חייל האימפריה אל קצה היבשת מגיע. ילד נרדם וחולם על קרבות שהיו והלוואי שכבר לא יהיו.
Right. You've been predicting it. We've been talking about it here on the show. All of the signs were pointing to it. When you shut down your nuclear power, when you go blindly into these ridiculous climate policies, this was going to happen. When you heap enormous sanctions on Russia and cut off your flow of natural gas, you look the other way when the Nord Stream pipeline is blown up. Yes, all of this was bound to happen. This is ridiculous. And you're right. And the West, well, the United States is in many ways cheering this on, right? The decline of Europe means the rise of the US dollar. So the United States is going to sort of sit back and let Europe shoot itself in the foot. And it seems like they are shooting themselves in the foot. Right now, they're holding the Beyond Growth Conference. And I want to get your take on this. This is unbelievable what they're planning in Europe, which is the idea of degrowth. So they're literally holding a conference right now on how do we not grow? I mean, it's absolute insanity. I just want to play for you one of the speakers that they brought in to speak at this conference and get your take on this. Let's listen.
Infinite growth on finite resources is not only a myth, but it's extractivist and ruthlessly oppressive by design. So when talking about growth and defending growth, there is a very important first question that we need to ask ourselves. Who are we growing this economy for? And what stories do we use to justify it? We have to acknowledge what lays below our growth. White supremacy, colonialism, and imperialism. White supremacy justifies a global system of exploitation and extractivism. Colonialism lays at the foundations of the European economy, institutions, corporate value chains, trade deals, investment agreements, and geopolitical structures of wealth accumulation, which means that there is no degrowth without decolonization. We need to take these conversations outside of these rooms and make sure that for all of the hundreds of fossil fuel lobbyists demanding growth, there are thousands of us demanding degrowth. We need to redistribute wealth, cancel climate debt, implement a universal basic income, massively invest in loss and damage funds, degrow the economy in high-income countries, increase universal public services, reduce working time, dematerialize, and reprioritize what it means to live a human life.
בתוך הדפים של הזמן שעבד, אנשים נגמרים ברגע אחד, אימפריות נופלות,
So, Ralph, white supremacy is at the heart of growth. A growth economy means it's white supremacy. And there's so many people in the audience that are shaking their heads right along with this. This is Europe right now.
Well, I think it's as bad in the United States, right? You cannot have a debate about anything, and at some point it's going to be white supremacy, colonialism, or any of these buzzwords that are used by these pseudo-intellectuals. And that's what they are. Like, the degrowth movement is a quasi-religious pseudo-intellectual movement. They have no footing in reality. This has to be said. And one thing we have to keep in mind, and we did talk about this previously, is that, of course, a lot of this kind of environmental economic agenda is driven by a boredom by an elite class. And just to give you an example of this Beyond Growth conference was organized by the European Parliament. Everybody who's a member of the European Parliament makes around 100,000 euros a year. Ursula von der Leyen, who opened the event, makes almost 400,000 euros a year, and that does not include all the benefits that they get. So this is a very, very wealthy, very rich class that revels in the idea to tell others that they have to adapt to lower living standards. And of course, they themselves, because they are so virtuous, are exempt from it. I mean, a lot of that was said at that conference is, to be quite honest, is quite ludicrous. I mean, the idea is that we have to live poorer lives in the future to save the planet, yet they themselves, of course, they cannot join us in doing this because they need to have access to these higher living standards because they are like the Praetorian Guard who is going to save the planet. Now, this is very comfortable for them, but of course, it's going to be very uncomfortable for us.
And of course, a number of these people, in order to research the degrowth process, the European Union has been handing out a boatload of money to these people. So all of these people are getting millions, right, in order to research how the rest of us should not eat meat and turn off our electricity, turn off our heaters, and all of these other things. Am I right?
Yeah, it's even worse than that, right? The European Research Council has now pumped 10 million euros, which is not a lot of money for them, but it's a lot of money for everybody else, into this kind of, and I call it under scary quotes, into this kind of research, because it is activism. If you read the publications out of the degrowth movement, this is not scientific inquiry. This is, as in the clip that you played, this is an ideological agenda that comes under the guise of science, but it is pseudoscience, nothing else. That European taxpayers have to finance this and are kind of paying for the mud through which they are going to be dragged is, to be quite honest, is in many ways cruel. And this is an open debate that one has to have, because if the point that the idea of the European Union or of the European states is to create conditions where life for their people is becoming more miserable and less less prosperous. I mean, all of them are basically in violation of their oath of office. The reason why we have governments is to create conditions in which we can live life to our fullest potential. We are not just pawns in somebody's ideological game where they feel good about themselves at whatever cost it comes to that, of course, somebody else, in this case us, has to bear. So this is a little bit of a revolt by the elite against the masses. It's very similar to France in 1789, shortly before the revolution, where an elite lives over its lives according to its own ideological devices, and then they want somebody else to foot the bill for it. And I don't think we should accept that.
זעקת, השכמה.
Right. That kind of thinking, though, Ralph, apparently it's white supremacy, it's colonialism. So, we got to watch out. Our sort of free thinking here is really anti-establishment right now. It's really troubling. Ralph Scholhammer, always great to see you, my friend. Thank you for your insights as always. And this degrowth, I mean, this is in Europe, but I have to imagine the United States is going to be jumping on board with this in an organized fashion soon, don't you think? I mean, we hear about it in the United States. Cut back, don't spend as much, stop eating meat. We see it in New York City. Eric Adams, the mayor, wants to track how much meat you're eating. We don't have a degrowth conference yet, but I imagine that's got to be coming.
No, absolutely. And we see this just as a quick other tidbit. I mean, now you have in Germany, they're planning a law for energy efficiency that the government can basically see how much electricity you're using on a regular basis or on a minute basis. I mean, this is surveillance. I mean, this is what we're moving towards. And the United States are a little bit further behind on this track, but they're moving in the same direction. They're trying to do the same thing. So all the environmental insanity that you see, particularly in Germany, but in other parts of Europe as well, the United States, at least under the current administration, are planning to do similar things. I mean, this is, again, if you make energy more expensive, you make life for the average person more miserable. It is really that simple. Now, they call it now in all these fancy terms, degrowth, or as you say, then they cloak it in this idea, this is how we atone for the past, this is how we atone for white supremacy. But to be quite honest, people of color will suffer from this the most. Let me just give you one quick tidbit. Most people in sub-Saharan Africa have access to the same amount of energy as somebody in France or Germany had in 1860. Do you really believe that they simply are going to accept this for the rest of their life? That they're going to say, in order to save the planet, we have to stay poor for eternity? They are simply not going to go along with this. And they shouldn't, to be honest. Like, they should have access to higher lifestyles, as should people have in Europe and the United States. So this is, as I said, it's only, if you take a closer look, it's only the very wealthy and unfortunately very often taxpayer funded who talk about this. But you never hear poor people getting into the streets and saying, tax us more, take away more from us, make our bills higher. It's always those who can afford it that say it has to get more expensive. We have to be very, very careful here.
Yeah, you're right. The poor, the middle class will absolutely be crushed the most. We've seen that absolutely already with these Russian sanctions. We see what's happening in Colombia. We see what's happened in Sri Lanka. These countries get hit hardest first, and then it trickles up from there. Ralph, great to see you. Thank you so much for your insights on this, and we'll keep an eye on what happens in Europe.
Thank you.
ובתוך הדפים של הזמן שעבד אנשים נגמרים ברגע אחד, אימפריות נופלות,
One day, one day, one day, I hope you see the truth. This puppet show, it stays on because of you fools. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues.
זעקת, השכמה.
אנחנו? שמעת על המאפיה? זה אנחנו. איך קוראים לך? נעים מאוד, ששון המחסל.
מחסל?
הבהלת אותי.